4805 and Pan Am 1736 almost became inevitable. It is the 27th of March 1977, and members of the Canary Islands independence movement detonate a bomb in a florist shop in Gran Canaria Airport near Las Palmas, Gran Canaria, injuring 8. As security forces scrabble to investigate, a second bomb threat is called in. Not wanting to be responsible for a massacre, the police are forced to shut down all traffic to Gran Canaria Airport whilst they search for the hidden device. With multiple planes in the air, the decision by air traffic control is to divert many aircraft to nearby Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife, now called Tenerife North Airport, some 75 kilometres away. Los Rodeos, by the early afternoon, was awash with aircraft, far more than usually experienced at the airport. The airport had only one runway and one main taxiway running parallel to it, with 4 short taxiways for connecting the two. So much was the congestion on the ground that planes were blocking the taxiway, forcing aircraft to taxi on the runway before positioning themselves for takeoff, a procedure known as back taxiing. At the beginning of the shutdown, Pan Am Flight 1736's crew would have much preferred to stay in the air in a holding pattern, as at 13:15 they had around 2 hours worth of flight.
30 seconds left.
However,
One enemy
the flight
remaining.
was ordered to land in Tenerife, much to the disappointment of her crew and passengers. Much better for the passengers' comfort to be ready to land when the all-clear was given, especially due to the long distance the flight had covered from Los Angeles with an intermediate stop at New York.
10 seconds
The
left.
crew on board consisted of Captain Victor Grubbs, aged 56, First Officer Robert Bragg, aged 39, Flight Engineer George Warnes, 46, and 13 flight attendants, along with 380 passengers, mostly of retirement age. The flight crew had over 30,000 hours of experience. Although not all covered on the Boeing 747, the crew were confident in the plane. The Pan Am plane was quite a historically important specimen for the 747's legacy. It had operated the inaugural 747 commercial flight on the 22nd of January 1970.
Watch and learn.
Not only that, but the plane had the honour on the 2nd of August 1970 to become the first 747 to be hijacked. Another plane caught out during the disruption of services to Gran Canaria Airport was KLM 4805, which, much like Pan Am 1736, had found itself diverted to Tenerife. The KLM aircraft was also a 747 and was chartered by the Holland International Travel Group and had departed from Amsterdam Airport Schiphol, Netherlands. The crew were also experienced, but was captained by somewhat of a KLM celebrity, Jacob Delhuizen Van
Spike down
Zanten,
A.
aged 50.
One
Van Zanten
enemy
was
remaining.
KLM star pilot and head 747 training instructor. So much was his value to the company
Reloading.
that his face was even
Human
on
or not,
advertising
that
material
omen
for
can
the
be
airline.
killed.
His flying career started in 1947 when he gained his private pilot's license, and by 1950 he had achieved his commercial certification and began working for KLM the same year. By 1977 he had amassed over 11,000 hours of flying time, 1,500 of which were on the 747.
You know what to do.
Accompanying Van Zanten on the crew of the KLM were First Officer Klaas Meurs and Flight Engineer William Schrader. Again, like the Pan Am flight, the team combined had several tens of thousands of hours of experience.
Smoke's down.
By late afternoon, Gran Canaria Airport slowly opened up to traffic again. This meant that the much delayed and diverted aircraft could complete their journey. Not wanting to delay
Enemy
further
down.
at its destination and not wanting to break the laws on duty crew working time, Van Zanten took the opportunity to refuel the KLM where they were. However, this would block in other aircraft, including
One enemy remaining.
for over half an hour. Much to the annoyance of the Pan Am, which still had enough fuel on board for the final leg of its journey.
Phenomenal.
The captain and first
for this.
officer left the plane to measure the gap between the KLM and the active runway, but the distance was lower than the safe minimum. They were obliged to wait. The added delay was further compounded by a Dutch family not going back to the KLM on time. Finally, at 16:56, Van Zanten's KLM radioed the control tower for clearance to taxi.
This ain't what they
Tenerife
signed up
Airport
for.
is at 633 metres above sea level. This has an unusual side effect. Clouds at 600 metres above ground level at the nearby coast, but at runway level at Los Rodeos. With clouds being blown in from the sea, this creates variable visibility where clear visuals 1 minute can almost instantly drop below minimums the next.
Stim
And the
beacon down.
27th of March was just such a day.
Launching smoke.
After 3 minutes of confused conversation, at 16:59, the instructions to proceed
Molly.
down the main runway and to backtrack for takeoff were received and understood by the flight crew. These instructions
enemy
meant
remaining.
that the KLM would turn 180 degrees once at the end of the runway in preparation for takeoff. At 17:02, the Pan Am called the tower for clearance to taxi. This was granted, but with the additional instructions to turn a third left taxiway. Pretty straightforward, you might think, but when you look at the diagram of the airport, those
Drink some
instructions
water,
make
reload your
little
mags,
sense.
and let's get back out there.
Only 2 taxiways on site look viable for a 747 to make the desired turn to reach the end of the runway. The taxiways were unmarked, and by now visibility on the runway was considerably low. The Pan Am called up the tower to confirm that it was not indeed taxiway 1 instead of the requested 3. The ATC replied abruptly, "Third one, sir. 1, 2, 3.
Launching
third.
smoke.
Third one." The aircraft proceeded to taxi up the main runway, marking off the taxiways to their left as they passed. Number 1 and 2 were successfully identified, but lost in the thick fog, the crew failed to identify number 3. A confused conversation broke out in the cockpit, hinting that they were now lost.
Spike down A.
Meanwhile, the KLM plane contacted
One
ATC
enemy
to
remaining.
confirm that they had passed
Flawless.
the 4th exit. The tower replied,
Fish in a
"Okay,
barrel."
make 180 and report ready for clearance."
Stay on their trail.
Almost immediately after the plane was in a position for takeoff, Van Zanten pulled back the throttles and the plane started to move. First Officer Mers advised Van Zanten that ATC clearance had not been given, and the captain replied, "No, I know that, go ahead ask." In doing so, bringing the engines back to idle. At 17:05, the KLM confirmed it was ready for takeoff and awaiting ATC.
Smoke's down.
Soon after, ATC informed the KLM what their route was to follow after takeoff, but no authorization for takeoff was actually given. The KLM replied and confirmed the information given, but added, "We are at takeoff," which is a non-standard message. ATC replied, "Okay, stand by for takeoff, I will be back." During this message, the KLM was ready for instructions. Van Zanten interrupted the co-pilot's readback with the comment, "We're going," taking ATC's non-standard as authority
Enemy
to
spotted.
proceed. The KLM released its brakes, took power and started to move down the runway. With ATC not being able to see the 2 planes in the thick fog, they thought all
Revealing
movements were
area.
still under control. The tower then contacted
Spike
the
planted.
flight, saying, "Papa Alpha, report when runway clear." To which Pan Am replied, "Okay, we'll report when runway cleared." Unbeknownst to the Pan Am and the tower, that whilst this final
One enemy
place,
remaining.
the KLM
Last player
had
standing.
started on a head-on collision course. Hearing the communications between the tower and the Pan Am, the KLM engineer said, "Is he not clear, that Pan American?" Van Zanten replied, "Oh yes," but still continued with the takeoff. The KLM loomed off in the fog as it hurtled towards the Pan Am. Captain Victor Grubb shouted, "There
My
he
power
is."
does not
The
end.
Pan Am was now
Ask
near
for aid, and
exit
you
number
shall
4.
receive.
Grubbs yelled, "God damn, that son of a bitch is coming." Captain Bragg applied the throttles and tried to turn onto the grass off the runway in an effort to avert disaster. Shortly after the KLM crew saw the Pan Am on the ground, by now it's travelling too fast to abort the takeoff. They rotated the aircraft and attempted to clear the Pan Am by getting airborne, causing a tail strike. At a speed of 160 miles per hour and at a distance of 100 metres from the Pan Am, the KLM's nose gear cleared the aircraft off the ground, but the left side engines, lower fuselage and main landing gear struck the upper part of the Pan Am's fuselage. The result was ripping apart the centre part of the Pan Am, almost directly above the wing. The right side engines crashed through the Pan Am's upper deck behind the cockpit.
Stim beacon down.
One enemy remaining.
The KLM led to a brief time in the air. It received physical damage and subsequently the plane stalled, took a sharp roll and impacted the ground 150 metres down in the pit.
A bow and arrow is
The right side engines crashed through the
old ways are the
path.
best.
The left side engines, lower fuselage and main landing gear struck the Pan Am's fuselage. The result was ripping apart the centre part of the Pan Am, almost directly above the wing. The right side engines crashed through the Pan Am's upper deck behind the cockpit. The momentum of the takeoff speed of the KLM led to a brief time in the air.
Safety's off.
But it had received critical damage and subsequently the plane stalled, took a sharp roll and impacted the ground 150 metres down from the Pan Am. After impact, the freshly fuelled aircraft burst into an uncontrollable fireball, engulfing all within. Seeing the inferno, rescue workers made a beeline to the side of the KLM, completely ignoring the Pan Am. In a miraculous turn of luck, the captain, first officer and flight engineer of the Pan Am 1736 had survived. This would come to haunt them for the rest of their lives. The only survivors of the disaster were 61 members of crew and passengers aboard the Pan Am. Many escaped through the now open central part of the fuselage onto the still intact wings, jumping to the relative safety of the
Now
runway.
we're cooking.
Last player standing.
Perished, most likely from the impact and fire when the aircraft hit the ground. Although not
Spike
clearly
planted.
informed,
One
structures
enemy
on
remaining.
The plane's fuselage were not operated. The 61 survivors were promptly
beacon down.
transported to Santa Cruz hospitals. Needless to say, Los Rodeos Airport, the only operating airport on Tenerife at the time, was closed to all traffic. This closure would last for 2
Nice
days
try,
to
kid.
allow some clear-up efforts. With 583 dead, 61 injured, and 2 multi-million
Some things
dollar
you
aircraft
just can't teach.
written off, the only questions available are how and why.
Boss, Bridgestone.
Initially, KLM, upon hearing about a collision involving one of their fleet, set about assembling an investigation team. The logical person for this task would be the head of pilot training, Captain Jacob Verhusen van Zanten. But the company would be shocked to find out at the helm of the disaster was their most experienced 747 pilot. The investigation into the event would gain international attention, in part due to it being a collision between a Dutch and American airline on Spanish soil, but also due to the entirely preventable nature of the crash. Both planes were sound mechanically, and both crews had more than enough experience for operating in such conditions. However, Van Zanten did take off, disregarding all the apparent warning signs, for example his first officer not gaining clearance for takeoff and the ATC giving no explicit instructions to allow him to,
Perfect.
which should have pointed him to stay on the ground.
Spike
In the back
down
of the captain's
A.
mind was a recently imposed law on the limits of time a crew can operate. When the rule came into
Scanning
force,
ahead.
it was relatively easy for a captain to work out how much time his crew had to work. But after December 1976, the process to work out the amount of operating time left became too complicated. This meant that crews could not work without fully knowing their remaining time, and as such, erred on the side of caution, as a violation could result in not just punishment from the company,
30
but
seconds
also
left.
Dutch law. This would have played on Van Zanten's mind, and even on
Last
the back
player
of the crew,
standing.
where exceeding the limits would result in the plane being grounded at Las Palmas and could have cost the company money and affected plans back at home.
Spike
Fear of being
planted.
stuck far away from home would have had an effect on the crew, called fixation, an almost tunnel vision-like mental state where the goal is the most important
Even with numbers,
thing
anything
and
can
all
still
potential
happen.
hazards are
Remember
ignored.
that.